koutou katoa, ko Sam Sivertsen tōku ingoa, and I'm here today with Clodagh Ward, to share with you about safeguarding and give you essential practical information on what safeguarding looks like in your ministry. So Clodagh is the Diocesan Safeguarding Officer here for the Christchurch Diocese. I'm so happy you could be with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Sam.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So Clodagh, can you tell us, what does your role entail as the Diocesan Safeguarding Officer?
Sure. Well, firstly, I'm one of 6 safeguarding officers here in New Zealand. Each diocese has a safeguard officer. And we're responsible for ensuring effective safeguarding practices are accessible and available to anyone who's in a ministry or anyone who's a volunteer, including religious and clergy within the diocesan entity.
So can you maybe expand a little bit more, like safeguarding? It's quite a big word. Like, what is safeguarding and who is it for?
So safeguarding is not health and safety.
It's not health and safety.
It's not health and safety. Health and safety is to have a culture of keeping people safe in a physical environment, and safeguarding is to have a culture of vigilance. Okay. So safeguarding is anywhere where you have people gathering, anywhere where you have people coming together, whether it's in prayer, whether it's at a sports club, whether it's at a school or a hospital. Safeguard practices need to be visible and in place so that people feel safe in the environments that they're in. But it's a learned practice. Okay. It's not a practice that you would expect people to just have. It's not necessarily common sense. Okay. You actually have to learn, how do I introduce safeguarding into whatever ministry that we're working in? But it's as much about you keeping yourself safe in your ministry or your environment, as well as the people who come into your environment. How do you keep them safe? And how do you have a visible culture of safeguarding? So there are practical ways of doing that as well. Okay.
Well, could you talk us through some of those things, please? Because I guess a lot of us here are either involved in running youth groups or, that's the main thing, or running events where lots of people gather. Yeah. So what does a visible safeguarding culture look like?
So in practical steps, it would first of all start off with good recruitment practice. So good recruitment practice involves things like your interviewing process. What is the process? Are there a couple of people involved in that process? Are the people who are conducting the interviews, have they been trained around how to ask the easy and the not so easy questions, so that you're always discerning as to the skills and character of the person who you're going to bring into your ministry, because in your ministries you will have responsibility for the safety of yourself and the safety of the people who come into your ministry. So you would have good recruitment practices. That's the first step. And then as part of that recruitment practices, you would do reference checks. You would do police vetting. Anywhere where you have somebody working with children or vulnerable adults must be police vetted, and that must happen before they start their ministry. So the other part of a practical step would be a code of conduct. So a code of conduct is basically outlines the list of what's acceptable behaviour and what sort of standards you want within your environment, within your ministries. And it really outlines that mutual respect that we have for each other. And most, or probably all, organisations will have a code of conduct. For whatever company that you work for, there will be an expectation of behaviour, of appropriate language, of outlined boundaries, and they're all rules and guidelines so that we can all work in an environment that is mutually respectful towards each other. A code of conduct I would have visible up in the group or the ministry or the environment that you're working in, but also any volunteer or paid staff should have read, agreed and signed a code of conduct. Yes. So it actually becomes part of your good recruitment practices. The other practical measure in place would be to offer and ensure there was accessible training to new staff, new volunteers in ministries around safeguarding. So that could be by way of, there's some online training that can be done through the childsafeguarding.co.nz, and that's a really good online introduction into what is safeguarding. And always remember that safeguarding is about keeping yourself safe and keeping the people that are in your community and in your environment safe. And what that would also do is give you an understanding of abuse, the different types of abuse. So the different types of abuse would be physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse and spiritual abuse. And the other thing to remember is that safeguarding is a really positive thing. So we are not here in our positions to assess harm. We're probably not qualified for that. Most people that come to the workshops might find that, that might be the question, well, how do I know how to do this? I'm not qualified. You don't need to be qualified. What you do need to understand though is, how do you raise a concern? So for anyone in our youth ministries, anyone who's got a leadership role, anyone who's got responsibility for people, you would need to understand, how do I raise a concern? Any size, it doesn't matter. It might be just something that you're a little bit unsure about, but if your environment is set up whereby you've got the language of safeguarding transparent, it's something that you start your meetings off with, it's something that's an agendaed item, when you come together as a team, so that it becomes part of, the landscape for you and for the people that you're bringing into your culture. So that raising a concern is really key when we're training our youth ministers as to what would a concern look like.
Because that's a good point, that I think maybe in the past a lot of us would think, it had to be quite big to raise a safeguarding concern, that would have to be pretty sure. So what you're saying is, even if we're unsure, if we're not sure where the line is or what's going on, it's still better to have that conversation?
Absolutely.
Okay, who do you think, who would be the best people to have that conversation with?
So the best people would be, so that also then is a question that once you have safeguarding, that's a question that would be tabled at a meeting. So as soon as you start talking about safeguarding, it raises all those questions like, well, who do I speak to? Who do I go to? So in a team setting, it's likely to be your team leader. Or it could be that somebody in your team environment you nominate as the safeguard champion. So, but different people, depending on the issue, you could, if you're not sure, you could contact someone like myself, or whatever diocese you operate in. There's someone like myself as a safeguard officer, who will be able to have a conversation with you and give you some guidelines. And the reality is, once the concern is raised through a conversation, there may not need anything to be done about it other than just a conversation. But there also may need something may need to be done about it. And there's no expectation on our leaders and responsibility to have all of the answers to safeguarding.
Fantastic.
So the visible culture of safeguarding is the communication.
Great.
It's all about communication. and nobody's expecting you to have the answers, but if you have the language of it, it opens up those questions.
Oh, fantastic. Clodagh, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all your knowledge with us. Just one more question before we go though. So where to from here? What's the next step, do you think, for those who are just starting in youth ministry, or even those that have been involved but actually maybe haven't done as much safeguarding, it hasn't been as much a part of the culture as before.
Yeah.
What's the next kind of practical step that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I would say, having watched this interview, ask yourself the question, what do I know, what do I not know? And then go back to, if you're a leader, go to your ministers, or if you're a minister, go to your leader and talk about safeguarding and identify the gaps. Because in safeguarding, where you have gaps, you have vulnerability. So prevention is the mother of safeguarding. So your safeguarding is always about preventative work and risk assessing. So you need to have a conversation, table it, have a talk about it, identify those gaps.
Okay.
You may find that those gaps are training, the online training. You may find that the workshops that are available that we're running currently in all parishes, in all dioceses, you might want somebody like me to come and run a workshop with your youth ministry, or with your leaders, or with whoever you see is going to be part of your infrastructure for running your events. You may find that you'll want to have a look at that code of conduct. You might not have that code of conduct. You might want to introduce that. Another thing I would have a look, because all of these things are underpinned by available policies and procedures. So we have the National Office for Professional Standards, which sort of sits above the safeguarding officers, and they give us advice on policies and procedures, and all of those are available on the website. And I believe, Sam, at the end of this you're going to put up our contact details,
yes.
And if people want to book a workshop, they can just book through myself or yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
And because I'm more than happy to go out, as we have done already, and do specific workshops tailored to your specific needs. And
fantastic.
One of the things that people have found the most helpful in the workshops are scenario discussions.
Yes,
so they've actually been probably the biggest help, whereby you could identify potential scenarios you would have within your group or with your youth, and then we can talk about them and talk about solutions to those scenarios, so that you don't have to second guess things. You actually have a process in place, so that you can always respond to any issues or concerns raised. So I would say talk about what is your culture of safeguarding. The likelihood is, for some people, you might not have even heard the word safeguarding up until recently, till you joined a youth ministry. But it's understanding and having an attitude that it's actually a key part, because when you ask children and youth why they feel safe, and we've done some research into this, the one common thing that the youth and children have said, I feel safe in whether it's a church environment or a club environment because there are enough adults around. Which I thought was really interesting, so that it was obvious from them that the adults had their safety at the core of the activity.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It was so amazing, yeah. So I think if you think about that, what's going to make people feel safe, and that's where you'll find your safeguarding. So it's preventative work.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
That's great. Oh, well, thank you so much, Clodagh. And thank you to you for watching. As Clodagh said, if you have any further questions, anything you're unsure about, or you just want some help in terms of actually introducing safeguarding into your ministry, please do get in contact. I will put those contact details up. We would love to hear from you and would really love to be involved in building this culture of safeguarding and vigilance in our church today. So, ka kite anō, enjoy the rest of the conference.